All right, so what we're going to talk about today is the importance of bracing and stability when it comes to looking at your training program and how we program certain exercises to make sure that we have the proper, um, you know, t techniques, the bracing stability, and how we can use these to further progress our progression inside of the gym, but also not falling to the wayside as far as using complex, unstable movements that look impressive for Instagram or for Facebook or just whatever, right? And we're still, trying to use these bracing and stability, these core exercises to make your training more efficient and help you get to your goal faster. So, what we're looking at here is this certain trend within the fitness industry as far as like functionally fit. And in my opinion, functional isn't always better. So a lot of this newer programming is going to lean on these unstable, surfaces using a Bosu ball, freestanding variations, under this umbrella of calling it functional fitness to where, like you're using these movements to relay these into life instances, right? Like, so if you're, picking something, up over your head, maybe, a power clean, if you're pressing something up, that could be something like an overhead press, things of that nature to where like it's functional fitness, not just straight hypertrophy based or strength based, things of that nature. So, when we think about functional fitness, we think of things like, unstable training surfaces, like using Bosu balls, single leg variations, standing, single leg variations, freestanding presses, again, things that aren't using a lot of bracing, or sorry, that are using a lot of bracing and core stability to do these movements. And really, what these are marketed towards is like real world strength and stability, right? Because people are going to argue, well, in the real world, I'm not going to be sitting, down in a seat and doing a chest press, right? Like that's not a real life everyday thing. But if I was to do something like, a deadlift, like to where I'm picking things up off of the floor or I'm doing, a standing, overhead shoulder press. Those are things that I can relate to me actually doing these movements in real life. That's kind of the whole initiative behind it to where like this is being pushed pretty heavily right now. And it's popular because it looks impressive, right? But it's not big because it does anything better for us. I mean, it doesn't really outtrain just doing the basics either. So you have to look at this as its complexity within these movements is not the same thing as it being a positive stimulus onto your muscle that you're actually trying to train. So in all of what I'm saying out of that is this functional training isn't always the better thing to do. And we'll kind of dive into this. So if we're thinking about why instability steals your gains in the gym, this is it's very basic. It's a very simple thought process. So when your stability is lacking, your nervous system is going to reroute energy to keep you upright instead of producing force into the targeted muscle. So again, if we think about you doing a seated shoulder press as opposed to a standing shoulder press, in the standing, you have to make sure that your legs, are locked in, or your core is braced and tight, or your lower back is in a good position, and then you can press upwards, right? But if you're in a seated shoulder press machine or even a seated barbell press, right? You're seated, you're firmly into the seat, your back is firmly against the pad, and you really only have to think about is you pushing the bar up, right? Using your shoulders to get the bar up, as opposed to if you're doing the standing version, you have to make sure that you're balanced, your hands are in the right spot, right? Like everything has to line up perfectly for that movement to go well. And then, just from a fatigue aspect, right? Systemic fatigue rises, quickly as your whole body has to stabilize, and your actual stabilizers within your body has to work overtime to keep you upright. So, with all that going on, the targeted muscle that you're trying to hit, that stimulus gets dropped down. Essentially, it's less tension of where you actually want it to be. So if we look here at like a stable lift as compared to an unstable lift, think of this again as the seated, machine shoulder press, right? You're going to be using 80% of that targeted muscle in this movement here while only using maybe 20% of your stabilizers, right? But if you're doing an unstable lift, such as a standing military, shoulder press, where you have to take a barbell, load plates on the side, step out of the rack and press it up, right? Maybe only 40% of the work that you're doing is going to go toward your shoulders, whereas the other 60% is used to stabilize you, just to hold you in position and make sure that you're, actually able to do the movement in the first place. So with these right here, right, the set actually ends before the muscle is fully ever trained. So in these unstable lifts, you're going to be more fatigued and get fatigued quicker before the muscle actually even reaches that point of getting fatigued. So if we look at this from a tracking progress perspective, you're not going to progress what you cannot repeat. That's why I'm always a big advocate of not changing up exercises all the time. Keep things the same for several weeks, months, several months at a time, just to make sure that we're, doing, repeatable movements month after month after month, and able to see progression that way. So if we look at this from how can we repeat these things using brace stable lifts are going to be a constant, constant from set to set, week to week, month to month, and that is what makes progressive overload possible. So again, if we're going back to that, standing overhead military press, you have to make sure that your hands are the same, distance apart every single time, when you step out of the rack, or your feet are the same distance apart. Or you're using, hopefully a progressively heavier weight each time, weight, sets, reps, tempo, things of that nature. But there's a lot of variables that go on, right? Perfect example here, seated overhead press, versus a standing. There are just fewer variables to control if you was to take that movement and get inside a seated shoulder press machine, to where you might just have to adjust, the seat height, because those handles are going to stay in the exact same spot every week. The seat can obviously change, but that's just one variable that you have to change, from week to week. Whereas the other, it's hand placement, it's feet placement, it's how you're going to have things set up. Like there's a lot of different things that go into that, and if you're not a good, maybe call it note taker, or like you're not paying attention, right? Like there's a lot of variables that you have to remember week to week to make sure that you're able to progress set to set, week to week, month to month over time. Another great example is a hack squat versus a free barbell squat. Again, if you're doing a free barbell squat, you got to make sure that, once you get out of the rack, your feet are the same, distance apart. You have the bar placed properly on your back. You have to make sure that you're, hinging at the hips, pushing your knees forward, all these different things that are having to go on to make sure that every single rep is repeatable week after week, set after set. But if you're in a hack squat, this guided path removes all of that, right? You just have to get into it, make sure that your feet are in the same place as it was last week, and then just go down, right? There is not a lot of variables to change. So if the setup changes every set, that's when it makes a progressive overload harder to hit. The data changes with this too. So a great visual of this is if you're, doing stable movements, one week, are you going to progress a little bit, and then it's going to flatline because you're not going to train, and then you're going to go again. You're going to progress a little bit, flatline, train again, progress, flatline, train again, progress. So, but if you look at the unstable one, all these different variables that you're having to, remember to do, and try to keep things same, the same thing week after week, set after set. If you look, you actually end up lower, doing the unstable variation as you would the stable version. And essentially, really what this is saying is you want to make this as easy and repeatable as possible, right? Like there is a certain brand of leg extensions that I like to use at my gym. It's got 3 different pegs on it that I could put weights on. It changes the resistance path for that movement. They call it, peg 1, peg 2, and peg 3. So in my notebook, I have what amount of weight that I put on peg number 1, peg number 2, peg number 3, and then I also have what number that I put the seat on, what number that I put the leg pad on, and what a number that I have the adjustable figure in the middle as well too. So I essentially have 6 points that I'm writing down in my notebook for this, a particular leg extension. Now, if we look at that one as compared to just a regular basic bare bone leg extension to where you're just changing the seat and you're changing, the pad placement, that's only two. So that's another example of like the more complex that you get with these movements, the more tedious that you have to be to make sure that every single week everything is lined up the exact same. Because if it's not, then again, it's hard to just use progressive overload efficiently. So now I'm a very big component of using machines. I love using machines. A lot of the times though, machines are seen as a downgrade from using free weights, right? Like if you think back to the late 60s, early 70s when, Arnold Schwarzenegger was the theme of fitness, right? It was all free weight stuff, barbell squats, barbell rows, things of that nature to where now a lot of the movement has shifted toward machines. And you can see machines as a tool that is going to, remove that balance demand. So your load and your effort within the set can actually go toward what it's intended to. So, and especially if we're thinking about somebody who is a beginner lifter, right? I would much rather you get inside of a squat machine than you pick up a barbell and try to do a a free weight barbell squat initially. Because if you're getting into a machine to where the pattern is fixed, like there are less variables to play with, you're going to have faster motor, recruitment, learning on that aspect, and you're going to be able to learn the pattern quicker. And it's also just safer to do it that way initially, right? And then it's going to free up a lot of that bracing capacity, for the big compound lifts that actually need it. So, as lifters advance through their stages of lifting, I guess is the best way to put it. The bracing capacity often becomes that limiting factor, not just muscle strength. So, if you're a beginner, obviously I think that you should learn the basics as well too. But starting out on machines, to me, where that's going to give you a lot of, core stability, is going to take a lot of that, bracing requirements out of it. It's going to help you, progress faster, and less likely to get injured as well too. So that's I'm a big component of using machines. Now, we've been bashing on these complex movements the entire time, but those instability like movements that we were talking about, like the Basu ball squats, doing standing single leg movements, the standing dumbbell or the standing barbell press, all of those still has a place, right? It was never an argument about not to train things unstable. I mean, because you should train your stabilizers at some point, right? But it should not be the brunt of your work, right? If we're looking at, what your weeks should actually consist of, the majority of your working sets should be braced, stable compounds. And then, outside of that, your accessory work like isolations, more smaller muscle groups, like those should be, secondary. And then finally at the bottom is these like stability movements. And again, it could be like, even another one is like dumbbell step ups, Bosu ball squats, B stance, RDLs, like things where like there are several moving parts that go into it. That should be a very small part of what your training is actually consisting of. So, kind of out of this whole thing, the biggest takeaway here is that you need to make sure that the brunt of your exercises you are training, with a very stabilized, core bracing movements, just to make sure that you have the movement patterns down, and you're also not using a lot of your effort for the bracing component of it. Use that, use those core bracing movements to put that effort into your lifts instead of using these unorthodox movements that just look cool, these functional fitness things, to where like a lot of your energy is now going toward you just holding that weight up, right? Like it's holding you up. Your, a low back has to be locked in. Your legs have to be a certain distance apart. Like that complexity of it is cool. It's great for Instagram. But as far as programming goes, especially if you're a beginner, just make sure that you stick to the basics. Use machines, and don't get too overzealous with it, I guess is the best way to put that. Um, but outside of that, Anybody got any questions with anything? Any insights about anything that you notice as far as like training with, I guess, more stabilized bracing movements as opposed to free weight, less stable patterns?
I kind of jumped in late, but
You're good.
I was just going to ask. So, I caught majority of it, but I maybe you said this in the intro. So, would you say that like majority of our lifts you would want to be more of like I guess like the more stabilized,
Yeah.
like things that don't require us to be, um, you know, require a lot more stabilization, I guess.
Yeah, for sure.
That
I
makes
mean, like,
sense.
like if you think back to whenever me and you trained a few weeks ago, I don't think we ever touched a barbell.
Yeah.
And we touched dumbbells, I think, once, and I had just added those in.
Yeah.
A lot of my things are more or less, how can I make this movement the most stable to where I don't even have to think about, balancing a bar on my back. Like I just want to be able to, like if I'm doing a squat, I'm going to do it inside of the hack squat, more so over an actual barbell squat. Because if I'm doing a
Yep.
barbell squat, then I gotta, use my lifter shoes or use like, a heel elevation platform. I gotta make sure that my hands are the same distance apart. I gotta make sure that, that it's sitting in the right place on my back. There's so many variables there. But in a hack squat, I just gotta make sure that my feet are the exact same place as it was last week, and then I just gotta squat down. It
Yeah.
just takes the variables out of it. And to me, it's a safer way to lift. I couldn't tell you the last time that I did like barbell rows or like a true barbell bench press. Not because I don't like them, but because I think there's better movements out there to where I can kind of not discredit, using the stabilizers. But if I'm trying to train my chest, I want to train my chest, not train, 50% chest and 50% stabilizers, trying to keep everything
Yeah.
balanced out. So,
And
yep.
how do you feel about like other, I guess, like accessories like the belts and stuff like that to help stabilize? Like, I feel like I kind of know, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of on the fence to where like if you I haven't used a belt in any capacity in a long, long time, because I try to make sure that I'm bracing, with my core first.
mhm,
Now that's not to say like if you have a history of like lower back issues, whatever the case may be, or you actually are lifting heavy enough weight to where like you need something to brace against, like if you're doing a heavy squat and you need to have
yeah,
have the belt on to actually brace your abdomen against the belt, right? Like to
yeah,
keep that force tight. For sure, use it. But then again, I don't use a lot of movements that require me to use that level of bracing, if that makes
got you.
sense.
Yeah,
So, I mean, now I'm sure if I started doing like heavy barbell squats again, like heavy barbell rows again, heavy standing overhead, dumbbell press or like barbell press, to where like I have to make sure that my core is tight and I'm not letting it get, relaxed to where I can have an injury, yeah, I would
yeah,
wear the belt. But, in the movements that I do as of now, if I have a belt, I don't know where it's at. That's how much I use it. So,
got you.
that's kind of my take on it. Anybody else got anything to add to that at all? And if you've never tried a Bosu ball single leg squat, if you can do that, you would probably be in the top 0.0001% of people who could do that. I can't do it. Think of a pistol squat, like where you're standing on one leg and then you're squatting down like on the one leg, and coming back up. I've seen very few people, and it was on Instagram, of them doing that, but on a Bosu ball. Um, it's very impressive. It couldn't be me. I
Yeah.
would I would fall over. But um, anyway, if anybody else don't have anything else, we'll wrap it up and go from there. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you guys got any questions, holler at me, and I will talk to you guys soon. See y'all.
Okay.